So yeah. Then it down somebody Geshe the Matis Rwanda away na. Most of the Jipa the Sawati, that Geshe said any country to go to Kwanda with the Ale, reputable away in Geshe so said, not to Simbi, need you to CB, turn the flying to Hijila, any carry. Geshe, you the Sado to Bamiba, not to Sankete, any Tunghijila, any Geshe's.
So then, now as we already discussed, the first of the sevenfold division of consciousness or awareness, direct and inferential cognition. Now we move on to the third, which is subsequent cognition. Now, as the term itself suggests, subsequent cognition, subsequent referring to the fact that it has already been made familiar with the object of its engagement, and it is not perceiving its object newly or for the first instance. So any kind of cognition which is not the first instance of cognition, and it is being made familiar with the same object again after the first instance of cognition is understood, can be understood roughly as subsequent cognition. So then these three, the first three, direct, inferential, and subsequent cognition, refer out of the sevenfold division, refers to the cognition which is able to perceive its object.
다 지바 가져가려서나 유주 시야들이 유주 시야들 가르스는 유대라 타지디 신주 온 대리에서 타주 메택 benang 가져가려서 와이나 잘라라고 제나 잘라도 수리에서는 밑디기래 시야 심디니 그 비치라고 가로랍되게 그 밑디기래 세 문이래 시야 문이래 세워도 심디니 타주 메택 타지디 가르려서나 신되게 타지디 그래 세워도 문이래 세워도 심디니 타주 지 메택 So
then the fourth, correctly assuming consciousness. Now, as the term itself suggests, there is an element of assumption in this particular type of consciousness, wherein you are not able to decisively perceive or get at the object. And there is the kind of the most potent form of this kind of consciousness simply rests in assuming something. So, for example, if there is a particular object lying on the ground, then we might have the assumption that it belongs to someone. Now, this assumption might be correct, that it belongs to someone, but you cannot decisively say that this indeed does belong to someone. So that is what we mean by correctly assuming consciousness.
The
Gotsuma sons.
Benatangazo, you just in a terrace. Could Jacha Jenny Sawada, could you the Reduk Sawara, touchy the Shini, you touchy the Shenju? When he lives in the city in the Tajuchi Matanki Rabutiora, Jaladawa in our data query, when he so double G Tendi, when you think something the Queen about Tajuchi Matanki. Rich Saint Yadabate, Quarterson and Dick Cook Jere, says something not Shambachibo Yude. I'm going to rebase and the Pataju, Jumatanki, to do with Tajuchi Matanki ora. Tell you choose. Cookie about Taji, Shingu, the Saint Tingu, the Yinayo, sitting the Tajuchi Mataki, Sibu Yawa Tumataki.
So we can understand it in this manner with the particular example of an object lying on the ground, and if we come into say a particular object that is lying on the ground, then we might have the conception in our mind that this 100% belongs to this person. But then if we are to really kind of effectively, certainly say that this belongs to that person, then there is no such certainty. So this is what we mean by correctly assuming consciousness. Yes.
I wanted to ask about, so what is like the difference between inferential cognition to correctly assuming consciousness, because it sounds very similar, the example with the smoke and the example with an object on the ground.
Then jibak dansra yiju parala ni chebak hariyoresra tanda chalaji michila ni thagiyore ki pedisha indi zambasra jibak da yiju parala chebar shida mebada wachinang dus krang la
제도 대 로제도 대선 담아서 제바 시아데 가르를 세와에는 진실이 뒤니 찌공 kinchi 시바지 차대 그래서 이제 시아데 진실이 깨뜨고 그래서 꼭 그거 말했지 제바서 어디 지스파서 어디 가서 잡아에는 최바지니 빠시아데 돈다 가르서는 최바제바 진생기 지 최바제발이 뒤니 찌긴기 어때서라 지바서 알레 고아도 럽스 두스러버 질레네 되고 그래서
So then there is a difference in the manner in which these two particular consciousness engages its object of comprehension. For example, when we look at inferential cognition, the certainty that it has about its object of engagement is based on a set of reasoning. This set of reasoning brings forth that certainty about the object. Whereas in the correctly assuming consciousness, it doesn't depend on that consciousness, on that set of reasoning, and as such, there is the lack of certainty about the object it engages.
Correct assumption may be based on intuition.
다 지와 다가랑 님말에 주들리기도 먼저기 이주를 해줘라. 디스템 나라 어디 이 삼삼디 오네 그랑 딱다 내라 해줘. 어딘데 로도지로 코고를 베스.
다들에 가르스는 이주 시아데 심티니 타지데 다크레 시아다보. 얘는 재미기 소속이 은이 이바데 하 가르스는 마동게 어디리질 유지세데다고. 심티니 은이 베 그디레 시아다보. 심티니 그 심반다보 여den게 은이게 타줘다보 지메 타기지 어려워. 어디라 가르스는 유지세. 유지기 친일이 그때라 롱연라 타지디 신중스. 지도 마타베리 바스야디 유디 또 마타바. 그지디 근데 시아디 선데 신도 그때 얘네요. 은이기 세보지 니수지 하마고 그지. 타줘 마타기지라. 다 유지세야도 어디로 버지 고알레는 되거래서.
So think about it in this manner that when the correctly assuming consciousness arises within our mind, then we have the conception or attachment towards the thought that this is 100% true. But that's just a thought. It is not based on reasoning which can bring forth a certainty, or it is not based on a direct experience which can bring forth that certainty which will help us to get at the object of engagement effectively. So there is an element of indecisiveness still, even though there is the conception and attachment towards the thought that this is 100% right, but there is no sense of certainty or conviction in that belief. So when we look at the technical definition of correctly assuming consciousness, it is defined in this manner: even though attached and conceiving of a thought as being true, it is not able to bring forth an effective or conclusive decision about the object of engagement.
그래서 되지. 다 아니 지디 가르스는 너무 많이 있어야 돼. 너무 많이 있으면도 지세보지 논den게 유디 가르스나 또 마동키지. 유디 세보지 고고대가 지 논데 고대와다 보인바요. 단다 세보지 하고 못하게 타주 못하게. 든지질 가르스는 너무 많이 쓰고 이래서.
So then moving on, the fifth is awareness to which the object appears but is not ascertained. Now herein it is important to understand that even though the object itself is not ascertained, the object appears clearly to such a consciousness or awareness. So, for example, even if we are able to see it clearly, even if we are able to hear it clearly, we are not able to make out exactly what it is, or we are not able to ascertain what it is.
And when we are saying awareness, we mean
Conscious.
non-matter?
Yes. Consciousness, we are talking about, as we already discussed, awareness, consciousness, perceiver, knower, they all refer to the same thing. They are synonymous.
Penangazo da pendabu shiwaine ti tini radabu chuchigodi. Penangazo ji temodabu moyedabu tadevadabu yina, temodil karasana senshuji indini, temodil senshuji tidibi kadola, tidini mijigi suzolichi, kechadabuji shiwadabu yina, dadi sibo kwache. Tendade kare sibo komago binde jowara, dadi sibo koi, si kare lasong, ji laya teni sibo kodeyache. Tenda kare lasong hamago binikasala, ti nikabsa, naishiba. Ti kar chagrasana nono mangi siya to ote chadir ji lava de sibo kodo gore de yinayo tonda de dere siya ti ngiyo maro che to nono mangi siya de ji non de kenge dere si taju che meta ba o tundi ji la peshana kwalen de yoresa.
So then if we are to understand awareness to which the object appears but is not ascertained, a simple example could be this, that when we become so engrossed in a movie that we are watching, all our attention is on the particular movie that we are watching. And if someone addresses us and says something to us, we hear it, but we do not attend to the meaning of what they are saying. So as such, we are not able to ascertain the meaning of what we hear. So in that particular instance, the ear sense consciousness would be an example of an awareness to which the object appears, but is not ascertained.
대차도 논망이스 다 대참스야도 로찌니바 대참스야디 이니 미나냐면 되려 대참스원데 빼나 가르는 디이나 디지이나 디미나 냐벨로텔 가르스네 대참스 디 küyina yo mishi pe chala da pe jawa jena chala de küyina yo mishi da jikina nya pe ta jwe me de ki lo din pe doba sa de gi ni ba de la karasa na te sam otos chi ni shege so.
Now moving on, the sixth is doubt or doubting consciousness. So doubting consciousness technically is defined as a two-pointed consciousness, two-pointed herein referring to its indecisive nature, wherein it is two-pointed in the sense that it is indecisive about ascertaining the object as this or as that.
대참대래도 다 담아 로시스야 되래 로시스야 되로 로바다 버리지 그 매바지라 여바지되게 빼는 아주 가르랬으나 저번 나사 쇼천부 여바도 든득이 가르랬으나 공를 따오니가서 공을 세번 통득이 메시지도 대소 가르스 로시리고 매바지라 공을 세번 많이 빠지라 세번지 되게 다는 이게 미신 공부다버자 온데 아니 가르랬으나 공을 공부 논데야 라고 진도와 미시기 든득이 솔로스 가르랬어 와이나 로비시바스 지 여발에 매바다 된게 매발에 여바다 된게 인발에 많이 기타 된게 든득이 레이트솔 가르랬어 와이나 로시스 오투치의 자괴에서 고한다고.
So then wrong consciousness, the last of these wrong consciousness refers to a mistaken consciousness, and more particularly mistaken with regards to its object of engagement. Now an illustration would be holding something which is existent to be non-existent, something which is non-existent to be existent, something which is existent to be non-existent. So a particular example would be if you suffer with jaundice, then your eye sense consciousness becomes affected by this disease. And when you begin to look at a white, for example, snow white mountain, then a person who is afflicted by jaundice does not perceive the snow white as white. He perceives it as yellow. So this is what we mean by mistaken or wrong.
제조 두리다고 지어도 단다 디갑소 로리 듄디 와서도 다 대세도 지도부터 어투스다고 차대 그랬어 지제는.
So this is one manner of classifying awareness or consciousness, this sevenfold division. That's
다들 만원의 링비는 다 예바데 가르랬는데 로리 숨디 왔어야 되래. 다 로리 듄디 와데 사와지. 아니 숨디 왔어야 되라 가르랬으나 듄지 수유디 집에 또봐 아니 가래래 롱체 수유대 집에 동미 마트위 시바 메바 선노지 수유대 집에 근데 동미 지시도 숨스 어두지네 네 대숨들에서.
So now moving on, if we refer to the handouts, we now arrive at the second manner of classification, wherein we kind of classify it through the threefold division. So the first of these is conceptual consciousness, which takes a meaning generality as its apprehended object. Second, non-conceptual consciousness, which takes a specifically characterized phenomena as its apprehended object. And thirdly, non-conceptual mistaken consciousness, which takes a clearly appearing, non-existent as its apprehended object.
대지 자득도 다 동버 가르에서는 아주 된지 수유디 집에 또바서는데 지당 아주 올라될 가르스니 대체다고 치와야 돼 니더블레 그래서 또바동 동미 시바스 로 차주도 뒤눈이 뒤 거로는 뒤로 그래서 야나 또바 이거 그래 야나 가르래 동미 시야데 자대 그래서.
So before we kind of move into this detailed discussion about this threefold division, it is important to understand conceptual and non-conceptual consciousness. So from the Buddhist perspective, all kind of awareness can also be effectively characterized as either being conceptual or non-conceptual, conceptual or perceptual. lesser.
제도 다 동보 가르에서는 똑바스나 가르치고 그래서 와이네 된지기 지니 그런 게 라농기 노 동보 콜은 라농지샤 라농기 지디니 여되는 종게들라 똑바스 된지송인데 파주고 여되기 라농지차 라농디기 지니 아니 파주 여되는 종게기 시바들라 아니 가르에서 와이나 똑바스 어떻게 되는 시작이 그래서.
So herein conceptual and non-conceptual consciousness refers, this kind of division springs from the manner in which it engages its apprehended object. So now, when we say that a conceptual consciousness is a consciousness which gets at its apprehended object through the use of a meaning generality. So meaning generality herein refers to a mental image of the object. So yes, meaning generality can simply be understood as a mental image of the object, not the actual object itself. We use a mental image, an image which resembles the object. So any manner in which we try to understand the object through the use of a mental image, a thought, concept or conceptual herein referring to thought.
Like gods in the form, like in religions, like in Hindu religions, like gods.
딱 만족이 튼지래도 똑바래져라. 디 식디스 콜라보시네 디시잖아요. 부두스 건석이. 아니 뭐이다 만족이 튼지래져라. 배샤나 아니 코난조 힌두기 luglatana ni saigi ni daguda ndera tela twenjila na digyore bes
다 된주스야 가르에서도 파주티기 라농지라 nguni 많이 나요 라농지 고 라농지여라 텔라 가르에서 와이나 아니 된지 스다버스 도치니 차디 그래서.
So simply understood, meaning generality refers to a mental image that we conjure up. So a mental image is not the actual object itself. We conjure or we think of a mental image which resembles that actual object. So when we use a mental image to understand the actual object, that is what we mean by a conceptual consciousness.
다 먹단다 가르서 힌디기 라이고
다구드서
제도 다 데다바 차도래 빼나 산지 군다 시안다 보데 산지 꾸기 잡부 소다 수슈지리마도 단다 유지해야 돼 은행게 산지 꾸데레에서나 말해 와서 된다고 지라 가르서나 고알리나 용 디고 그래서.
So we can try to understand it with the example that you cited. Now trying to place the examples closer to us, when we look at the image of a Buddha, a representation of the Buddha, that is not the actual Buddha. That is a representation of the Buddha. This statue, this particular statue, is not the actual Buddha. It's a representation of the Buddha. So a mental image or a meaning generality could be understood in this manner, that it is not the actual object, but it is a representation, a conceptual image of the actual object.
제조 따다다 가서 되돌아 시사로 맞아봐 잡아이나 군다서 끝이야지 소부대로 근데 산지구 군다 근데 산지구 끝성원도 산지기 소부대라 산지구 끝면 따로 와라 당다 되돌아 가르서는 산지구 끝 소부대 잡으지 수주저래마도 근데 산지기 끝대래에서는 말해와 산지구 끝이나 산지기 소부대 이고 거라 대 말해와
So when we look at such a statue, it is important to understand that when we perceive such a statue, that statue is not the actual body of the Buddha. It is important to understand it is a representation of the body of Buddha. Right? So similarly, through the manner in which we engage a particular object, it is important to understand whether we are actually perceiving the object itself or we are perceiving the object through the use of a mental image.
제조다 단다 간조 로를 배배샤와이나 배는 추로다와이나 가종들라 니 인연라 미도 hin지 뭐지 통다와이나 디리기 엉이 가종 미도 들이지 통송세야디 생레 샷자야기 미도지 생레 샷야기 미도기 예브다부지 농아다부지 도와 데스 거래서 던치세야데 데 가르에서나 가종 통대야 미도군이 통대야 미도 되기 그 잡으다부지 손이다부지 레마도 가르에서나 공문이기 미도 데레에서는 말해와서 제조 가족 미도 약부지 통하다고 있는 데레기 니게서 아니 선에 차대야기 미도기 순이지도 어다 데를 던지셔야 돼 어데래서
So now relating it to our own experiences and how we need to make sense of conceptual and non-conceptual consciousness. So non-conceptual consciousness is, for example, if yesterday you saw a flower, that is a non-conceptual consciousness because you directly perceive the flower in that particular instance. Yes?
That's
now,
direct perception.
yes, and it's also a non-conceptual consciousness because you saw the flower directly. Yesterday you saw it with your own eyes.
Okay.
Yes? Now related to the image of the flower, that when you think about the flower today, the image of the flower that you see in your mind today is not the actual flower. It's an image of that flower. It's a representation of that flower. So any kind of thought which pertains to the flower that you saw yesterday, today, is a conceptual consciousness.
제조
Does this definition include the fact that sometimes when I'm maybe not paying close attention and I see a flower, then I'm only actually projecting the mental image that I have in my mind of the flower and not seeing the actual object?
다 거기 뒤와디 튀기도. 아니 근데 이나스라 똑바 똥민 라이죠라. 간족이 아니 소소기 용화다 자르나스라. 참참 아니 간족이 메도지 딱 뒤라 연나 양스라. 메도디 카투파니 마독네라. 메도 유에삼삼 길로로 지부지게라. 소소기 로네 파 메도 유에삼베기 니 셴바도죠라. 파 조탁나스라. 대안이 똑바차기 여러베스.
도 땅게 대용 또바래 도 땅게 대용 또바 차대 그래서 도 땅게
So this is exactly what we need to what we mean when we say a mental image, wherein we begin to superimpose that image or project that image onto the object.
제조 따단다 디기 던지 샷이야 돼 던지 상해들로 똑발래 마도 또메를 들이기 던지기 놓아대 여래서는 여 말했어 어때 가서 지보지 하고 고지 대차대 그래서
And now at this point it is very, very important to clearly understand that a mental image only appears to a conceptual consciousness. A mental image does not appear to a non-conceptual consciousness.
제조 빤도 빼는 가서 미시다 보이나 카둑디 메두달라 따와이나 메두디 코는 그 파주고 유젠바 메두 컨트지에나 가서 미실란 시보지 차타기도 와서 그 라노다고 게 말에 그 위니스 투바죠 그 차타기도 와서 이제 데라 가르에서는 송이세 깨제 나기에 말했어 무슨 그래 이때서라 예시보 차되게 돼서라 아니 가르에서 와 있는 든치 세야 차고마 든치 세원디 예시보 참 맞답니 거기 라노고 주네 봐 여대라 반 주공 기지라 아니 가르에서 와 있나 또 봐서 어떻게 되시 자원 그래서
So if we understand this, then we begin to understand that direct perception is a form of non-conceptual consciousness. So as such, it doesn't have to depend on a mental image to get at its object, because it is able to perceive its object nakedly raw as it is. It does not have to use a mental image, or it does not have to use a resemblance of the object. It is because of that inability of a thought or conceptual consciousness to engage its object directly that it has to employ or use a mental image to get at its object.
Question.
Yeah.
Like as per my understanding, consciousness grows. Like we have to go through all these stages from wrong consciousness to doubt to awareness, to which the object appears but is not ascertained, then upwards, then correctly assuming consciousness, and finally we perceive it directly. So my question is it possible to directly perceive without going through the stages?
Tene Kurangi kodora, kodo la shishanasra, ini nganzogi lori dungi namsha diisra, ini nganzogi sheba kongpel tongwe rimbada uchila, ini samla tongki yoresra. Tangbo ini lokshe ra, tene tezom, tene nolamanye, tene yiju, tene ini Geshe ra, tene ini jeba, ini tamadela, ini yuraba ra, ngusum to toya. O tendes jurim tende ujikane, ini lodi la naira. Sheba di kongpe tong ayarwa, tendegi rinpa da uchi resra. Tanda Kurangi tende inasra, nanzogi tendegi rinpa jurim da uchi la maten nesra, tema tagdo yu rakpa ra, jemba tok tuyegi sheba gi nipa chi, tema tagdo chiya yorabes.
Teda yujeti tingdu ra, tiri karasana, pena nganzo parare sewa ina, midu rabu ji towa la, mishi rabu towa la, tongbo lo shi ji. Ani tesam, ani yuje, ani jishi, ani turi siya de, ramba de pachi, yu ramba de sola, turi jindi, juba rabu de pachi, rogoji mari tingdu san.
So I don't think that it is necessary that we have to kind of follow this temporal or chronological sequence of first developing a wrong consciousness, then developing doubt, then in this manner, and then finally reaching at a direct perception of a particular object. That it is not necessarily the case, because, for example, if we have to perceive a flower, if we have to see a flower, it is not necessary that we have to develop a wrong consciousness about the flower first in order to perceive the flower.
No, let me reframe the question.
Okay.
As per my understanding, like consciousness is like coming from the past life. It is not like fresh in this life, right? So it is carrying the past life learnings also in this life. So for example, in past life, our consciousness was at 1, 2, 3, 4, a level 5, awareness to which the object appears but is not ascertained. So in this life, it will go upwards from here only. I'm not saying that it will go to doubt first and then grow upwards.
It's still not
It
clear.
will carry the stage at which we left our body in the past life, and in this life, we will move upwards.
Now, what would be the object with regards to which?
The supreme, the entire concept, when I'm trying to understand, the object is God for me. I'm trying to perceive God.
Ta moi thio de dir pena chashana nganzu gi tsengima la asra sheba gi ani sheba ji yorwas sheba di da jun tu ne ma tsedela le ngo yorwas tsedela le ndu zamba ani sheba di soba da regio maresra soba da regio mari la di khala ge la na pena chashana ani sheba gi ta thangwa do jora thangwa icha do de pena chashana rimba do shina ta rimba ngaba jora no la mai gi ani rimba do chile le di gi resra kurang gi ta samla tang dan china ani chezani sheba de la khala warda yula jardang do ra yula jugdang do de ra na la mai gi rimba do chile le di res ani ngai da yula jugla du zamba yu khande chile sha gi yelan ge jatin ba ani kurang gi yu sha le zamba da kurang zo hindu gi le la ani kunchok le chile yi chi gi ro hanzo jigden ko bo le chi ra ani kunchok rig ma rig kunchok tok ma do le chi ra tende do chi la ani pesha gi yes kurang gi
제좀 다 든득이 녜스 산도 동도다고 지게나 간주 숙진기 렉 문주기 렉 돼서라 단도 저런 거 써왔는 시기 주바데 파제 로고지 말이 되고도 맨날 시바다 보이나 보다 보이나 혹시 아미쿠바는 맞제와 타만이 거 메이다 보이는 죽카도 예메 돌아서 바테 다기 가르스나 배 통초다 버리 마도 뒤르기 주라다 보데 파제 주고지 말이 되고도 알레 동부대네 지자다.
So from my perspective, I think that it is not necessarily the case that in the manner in which the mind or consciousness engages what, as we discussed, manifest objects of knowledge or direct objects of knowledge, then it is not necessarily the case that we have to kind of follow this temporal sequence of development from wrong to doubt and so forth, because it is evident that when the mother gives birth to a child, then in a very short manner of period, the child is able to readily perceive form, shape, color, and so forth.
대지 용도 와서 다 구적이 레이트서라 가지고 도스산의 동사 가려요래서 와이나 빼나 동보 구적이 레이트서라 동보 대삼지 대삼지 저 유대라 아니 가려서나 유주지 유지지 저 유대라 가려서나 집아 체마스야 되지 체마되지 저 유조라 가려 지시 아니 무슨스 든득이 집아 그람바 조동지 요래서나 어떤 두시는 대시자고 요래서
Now, the kind of temporal sequence of developing consciousness that you are referring to, I think, relates with what we in Buddhism call engagement with hidden objects of knowledge. So then, in relation to hidden objects of knowledge, then it is indeed the case that maybe doubt arises first, and then through doubt you begin to come to some sort of assumption about the object, and then to overcome the assumption, then you employ reasoning to get at the object. That's inferential cognition, and then through refining the cognitive process by contemplating it with reasoning again and again, then maybe you come to a direct perception.
In Buddhism, what is it called?
What?
You just said engagements in hidden?
Engagement with hidden objects of knowledge.
어째도 든득이라바지 연구를 맨날 가르래서 와 있는 가지고 뒤지 다 록시스야 때 든득 록시때 든득이 양 원도하지 가지고 시그레 위해서는 시그여 말했어 록시때 루비시바 타마 록시스야지도 와 록시때 라소바테다 아니 가르래서나 체마당 원산도 지바당 로 지바 체마도 유제당 든득이 양 원동케지 시그리 위해서는 대신에 디스칼리 가보다고 차대 그래서 루시기 레이트서 니몽그 레이트서 패치와 루시다고 차대 그러와 뒤뒤 니몽그 레이트서 가르쳐서 가서 떼니 뽕도 그래 자와도 주바도 주바 뽕도 그래서 마도 뒤뒤 주랑이야 너야기 깨자듯이 대시 자와이나 디스칼리 가보다고 연구해서
Now, with that being said, it is also important to understand that from the Buddhist perspective, we wouldn't exactly say that the wrong consciousness can be developed in this manner to change into a direct perception later on, because wrong consciousness is understood to be in the nature of afflictions themselves. So afflictions are looked at as something which can only be effectively terminated at its root. It is not something that can be developed into a direct perception or a inferential perception. This is, from a Buddhist perspective, very difficult to accept, that a wrong consciousness can be developed to change into, for example, or develop into direct perception or cognition.
제좀 드리지 차대기도 왔어. 다 드리 차온데 딱 아주 도스산의 동거래 세마가 단다 되지도 그래서는 가르 지시세야 디 심이 준데 두고야지 레스 세마게 동부 여트 사도 또 비니가셀라 세마 가또 장경기 또 장게데 영자 동기 되라 지시세야다 지시데 세마니 랍 드비 람바다고 지와이나 동부 세마다 디지세 지시 적응이라고 차대 그래서
So now it is also important to understand that just because it is a direct perception does not mean that it is a valid perception. Direct perception can also be mistaken. So as as such, it is also important to understand that we also classify the process of cognition as either being a valid cognition or an invalid cognition. So if we understand this, then we can also begin to appreciate subsequent cognition more clearly. So there is a temporal sequence, there is a chronological order in which subsequent cognition arises, that it is only after a valid cognition that it can a subsequent cognition can arise. Yes. So then, in our discussions about this sevenfold division of awareness, it is important to appreciate that we also classify awareness or cognition as either being valid or invalid. So as such, if we are to make sense of subsequent cognition and the chronological order in which a subsequent cognition arises, it is important to appreciate or understand that only after a valid cognition can a subsequent cognition arise.
제도 다 던두기 ramba들랑 아주 도지 산도로 동거에나 동보들에 대참 찍고도 대참 지체비 요들라 아니 가르스나 동보 이나미나냐 던두기 진식이 돌아요 이 산도도 집어지고도 근데 받지 자자다 보이나 자자 주주 든지 자주 구주 구주다 보지 라운드 타지 받지 대인사래 세야디 유지들라 대니 유디 띵뉴스 인바 타주비 니가스 세마 세야디 지바 세야 타주어 지바 되기 트립스 요들라 아니 기지니바 될라 가르스나 지시 세야라우 다 던두기 되는데 영도 강도인데 타미니가스 진센을 진센 주는 때 먹어 봐 소소그 용맹이 통이 라트비 니가서 무슨 세야 돼야 바 주비랑 봐 봉란다 버때 도시지나 마야 산노 동아이나 동아지 용도 와서 동보 대상한다 버지 대상지 위주들라 영디 뒤줄을 시주지 제바도 버지와이나 근데 바지 자서 구제다 버 타지다 다데 레다 세야다 버지 이주지 아니 될 베데 타주집이 니가서 딱고데 타주비 니가서 세마 세야 지바세야 차오 지바 되기 또 차이비 되는데 라인 대미 니가서라 지시 세야 돼 든두기 영디 딱 되는데 영디 산노동 다 진시 주는 때 먹어 봐 용이 통의 라트비 니가서라 아니 가르래서는 무슨 세야 돼 로디야 보란도 뭐 가르서나가 조비랑바다고데 어토치니 용고여래서
So now we are trying still to make sense of the manner in which, with regards to ascertaining an object and gaining true knowledge of an object, the temporal sequence or the chronological order in which these kind of consciousness can be developed and trained. So, from the Buddhist perspective, we understand it in this manner, that first you can develop a doubting consciousness, and you are still indecisive at this point about what exactly is the reality of the object, okay? And then based on that doubt, you begin to think of reasons that maybe this is the case, maybe this is the case, and through that kind of reasoning, you come to a correctly assuming consciousness wherein you are almost 60-90% decisive about the object and the reality of the object. Now, based on that, you employ reasoning again and again, rational analysis. You try to engage the object with reasoning again and again. So, engaging the object and trying to get at the object through the use of reasoning, we already understand as inferential cognition. Yes? So, if you come to an inferential cognition of the reality of the object, then any instance after that first moment of getting at the object through the use of reasoning is understood as a subsequent cognition. Yes? And then now through that kind of familiarizing yourself with the object with reasoning again and again and again, then comes a point wherein through that process of contemplation you overcome the use of reason itself. Now it is established within the continuum of your own experience of the object itself. So as such, you come to a direct perception of the reality of the object. So this is the manner in which consciousness is trained or developed from doubt to coming to a direct perception of the object.
대지차도 알링이 찍지로 가지고 저도 다당 가서 가려서는 재밌게 되라 samskeri to ni kari deshi jagorasana pamanasgdo parsiati karasana pasiati gi drati gi juidabote zo dabotang ani tombo zo dabotang ani tombo la parsiati ro manasiat karasana jawa yon jawa yotobas atikogdoas simigi dadunde teredo pamanasio de parsiati karasana zo ani tombo 아니 가르스나 마나스야디 자와 또바 송디 치미교데텔라 아니 예데 사도 또바 요나 여기 조 또바 어떤지는 대시 자동도 뭔가 니도부터 지는 용거래서
So herein at this point we are talking about valid cognition. All these instances of coming to a direct perception is a example of a valid cognition. So when we use the word valid, we are trying to understand that it is getting at its object correctly. For us to appreciate what exactly do we mean by valid cognition, I think it is helpful to look at the original Sanskrit word and how this original Sanskrit word is interpreted. So when we look at the original word, it's pramana, pramana. So there are two kind of aspects to this particular term. Pra broadly is understood as valid. But now, when we are talking about the manner in which a mind engages as an object, then we need to understand that pra herein refers to prime, or the first, or new. So it is referring to the first moment of its engagement with the object, and that first moment of engagement with the object itself is unmistaken, incontrovertible. And mana herein referring to knowing or cognition. So prime cognition, a very literal and technical understanding of valid cognition would be prime cognition.
제주 든드그 고알라 때니 치마 시아디 유드 사도 도발을 대시지 자거래 영원 가시기 대다 가시기 요사도 도바 마이나 요조 동케제라 아니 가르에서는 치마스 오두진데 시자동 뭐다와 니스로 그래서 기찬이 치마 시아디 요사도 동발을 대와 잡아이나 다 기지니바데서 두신나 사요 동케데서 아니 치마 시아디 레그 말에 지시 시아디 두진데 자디고 그래서
So now if we understand this, then we begin to appreciate now there are two different interpretations about what exactly constitutes a prime cognition or valid cognition. So if we understand prime in the sense as referring to the prime object of engagement, then it must be unmistaken with regards to the prime object of engagement. Now if we understand prime as new or fresh object of engagement, then it must be unmistaken with regards to a new object of engagement. Now with these two kind of different interpretations, there are implications in the manner in which we understand subsequent cognition. Because if it is the case that we accept the interpretation that it is always a new and incontrovertible or unmistaken consciousness, then any other subsequent cognition of the same object does not constitute a prime cognition or does not become a prime or valid cognition. It becomes simply a subsequent cognition.
제조 드리지온데 노바 산지비 트나마와라 슈이비노니 벤 제라마와 노데바 가르스나 섬잠바 대속이 가르레스나 체마시온디 동보 빠만나서 빠르시아디 요사도 동해지라 체마스 도시니 대시 자기요레스 다 탄조위 미시카레스네 대시 고니바데잖아 마나시아디 사드 마자와지니 조 유디 조 동해지라 체마스 도시지온디 아니 지시대소요 가르레스네 체마스 도시니 키니도 그레스 탄조위로라 유디 조 동해지라 체마자와에서 지시대요 체마 이슬레 그레스 다 산잠바다 제라마 노데발라소바 대다기 아니 로 여데 사도 또 바텔레 체마 자거마도 또 챙기게 라이 동기들라 체마스가 말이 지시스그레스야데 디시자도 만다와 니도 어토치니 용거여서
So now we need to place this understanding within the framework of the philosophical system of the classical Buddhist schools. So when we look at the four traditional Buddhist schools, they are the Vaibhashika school, the Sutra school, the mind only or the Chittamatra school, and then there is the Madhyamika or the middle way school. Now it is the case that even within the Madhyamika or the middle way school, there are two sub-schools, or the autonomous Madhyamika school and the consequentialist Madhyamika school. So from the Vaibhashika school to the Sutra school to the Chittamatra school and the autonomous Madhyamika school, they all accept the definition of prime or valid cognition as a new and unmistaken consciousness. The pramana, the word pramana, they understand it in this manner. It is only the consequentialist or Madhyamika school or philosophical system that begins to assert that this is not a correct definition of pramana. Pramana means that it is unmistaken with regards to its prime object of engagement. So as such, according to the consequentialist Madhyamika school, then all subsequent cognition are also valid cognitions. You had a question? It's okay. This one.
Sorry, just related to actually to English translation. When you say, like it's apprehended object, can you give another synonymous?
Perceived object.
Okay, the ones that is in the main object of
Now we will get into a more detailed discussion about the manner in which there is a difference in engagement, in apprehension, in appearance, and so forth later on. But for the purposes of discussion now, we can understand it as how the mind directs itself to its object and how it engages the object and perceives, in that process, perceives the object. Yes.
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 Can we just say in very simple terms that the word pramana is actually the proof that the mind is looking for?
Tene kodeboro jishenasra, manzogi tsemalanasra, ene yudi tokbalasra, da nyebaro jigora, nyebadi dime chidhusra, ene manzogi da kalawar, drubjegi rigbala naira, drubjegi tsewa dela ene kona digiyor bes. Pangdaro yora da. Tindiro jilo kona digiyor.
Karase?
Tsema la nganzo pramana la jora.
Tsema.
Ti nganzo gi kodeboro ko lenasra. Ene nganzo gi loisra, yudi tokbala asra da, drubjegi ribado jigora was. O ti ne drubjegi ribat tsewa sicheba dela ene tsema la na kona digiyor bes.
Tsindu rangda regimido. Tsema sungde karresene yudi pa nganzo tse pena chala rabo ina tse ringpo sungde tata rabo nganzo tse sungde chala rabo je ina tse ringpo dela tse sung se jiora. 여기 니스 데레스 파 타지니 파 최종 탱기지라 랍자라고 시와니 둘인데 자동문다 알레 동부대 시와 있는 아주 최종성의 가르쳐 버지 연상자부 따단자부 취비 니가서 최종 쓰고라스 이 논식이 체마성의 유득이 니스 따다지 최탑게 따다지 타지 탱기 된리jel에 체마서 고아지 랍나 렌야 용케지도 와서
So this is not exactly the case. Now, let's try to make sense of this in very simple terms by looking at the words themselves and try to make sense of the word. So before we begin to try to use the word prime cognition, because it only stems from one particular interpretation among the many different Buddhist schools, the kind of general term we use is valid cognition. So how do we make sense of the word valid in general terms? So for example, when you say this is a valid opinion, and so forth, what do we exactly mean? That such an opinion or such a conception actually accords with the reality of things. This is what we mean. So in relation to valid cognition, cognition herein referring to a consciousness. So a valid consciousness or a valid cognition refers to a consciousness that is able to get at its object correctly. How it gets at its object actually accords with the reality of the object. So this is what we mean by valid.
No, actually, I would like to reframe my question. I Sanskrit word praman, and you broke it in two parts.
Hmm?
Praman means proof, evidence.
Hmm?
So when we decide, or we have to decide whether it's a valid consciousness or valid cognition or not,
Hmm?
then the parameter is like the parameter should be proof. That is there any justifiable proof or evidence that this is what you are perceiving is true?
Hmm?
So that should be the parameter. Maybe praman should be taken in its literal term. Is that what you wanted to say? Yeah.
다 코란 속에 뒤어디 연조군의 땅이 주기 도스라. 코란 속에 뒤어 땅이 시심사로 줘라. 아니 간주기 레자기 켈라 프라마나레 식티 페치 돈와스. 아니 코란 속다 레자기 코알레나스라. 프라만라나여라. 아니 리버기 드롭지지라 코게요레스. 라. 아니 방다도 붙이라. 어딘데지라 코게요레스. 제선 코란기 뒤어 땅 고에기 시도디 아니 Pramana like sikdigi, and Praman like sikdigi koajura. The repeat drubji lajura. What in Regila coaling Lenetongir is.
That's a Semasia, the Tundichini, Jensen Shia Yura, Dirichin, the Shija Yuris, and Yuris, Penangazu, Dirichin were, Michigi, get a demara of Shivaina, get at the Semari Siachi Doa. Karasugoras and Tandara Vodel, could get a shit the day. We've been used to Tibare, Sikit Tishigaras, Kukija Shia della, Karasoina, Semare, sing as a Dishijago, Kukija deducted Karasu, when you see Semare, so do Kukija Shia de, Dunley Nibadabochi, Tadadabochi, Quadi, Tigduas,
So, of course, it makes sense to accommodate such an interpretation of the word pramana too. Now, we need to make sense of this in this particular context right now. So this is why I'm trying to illustrate a real-life experience and trying to relate the manner in which we understand valid. So for example, when we say that if someone is saying something and then you begin to say that what he is saying is valid, right? We use such a word to refer to something that someone is saying. So what exactly do we mean when we say that, oh, what he is speaking or what he is saying is valid? It means that it accords with reality. So this is what we mean by valid in this context.
Kukecha de Semaresion, Kukecha Shebati, 20 degree, Sia di City to do us. Tindu Quating on Zola Telewaina, Logan Deres, Tachi de Atua, Semagi couldn't Deres, could the Matapares, Tachi de Ate, Mobinusu to Tuba in Zakare, Sema Siondu, Koronga Tachi Seate, Dungubinusu to Tuba, Demba Inza, and call it Semas, made to in the town. What is
So now bringing it closer to what we are discussing. Now, the same understanding, saying that something is valid in relation to cognition. So, a valid cognition, if we have to say that a particular cognitive process is valid, we use the term valid cognition. So, if we are to understand it in a similar manner, then let's say that a valid cognition of impermanence. Right? A valid cognition of impermanence must accord with the reality of the impermanence in the object itself. So that's why it is a valid cognition of impermanence, because it accords with the reality of the object being impermanent. So this is what we mean by valid, that it actually accords with the actual reality of the object that it is engaging.
제조 고조 단다 선수교리는 체마스야 돼 가르고레시
방다
리베드지 제조 간조라 나지 지팅기 기자 시온데 테러 그 진신데 체마렌도 시야지 체마지 시에도 단다 가르서 그 진신데 덴바렌도 시야 데고고로 매직 진세 시조아에는 그 진신데 체마레다 생각도 기시고라 다때 체마레 단다 가르서는 그 시에데 바노지 돈이 니기도 고아테 랭고고로 왔어 체마스온데 바로 진신라 조야도 바로 가르서는 시바 코로나야 준조야
So it is important to now, as you pointed out, that when we look at the word pramana, then pramana can also be interpreted as proof or evidence. Now this is exactly what we mean when we say that something is valid. What exactly establishes that validity? the reality that it accords with reality. So now we need to understand that we are talking about the validity of a cognition, not the validity of the evidence in the physical form itself. So we need to understand that the validity of the physical evidence, we're not talking about that. The validity of the cognition in its relation to the object, that's what we are talking about. Validity in the sense that it is unmistaken.
Pamana siate paru yichi koron le jawado dijela jayado tundugiri damara mobuji yondugidos and nabazu choroso dabayina dan sanskrit ching dabayoin tikatol ngshi pamana siate juyu katu chitawa dabayina dandang tigia siri dabaji rogo ras azo pesa ngor paru chema di kor lo koron le tendawa paru le karisne jinsen la dubje choroso wayina ponda dabodon jinsen dabola koya jinsen chemare siato dubje chemare siato tundugi chemati juyu de 지마에 봐 주요 뭐부지 과 연구도 와서 아니 저런 미시 선스크린 책임다 보이나 hindi 얘기 하고 그러서 디칼다 와이나 당동 진세다 본다다 보디 시리로 그러서
So with that being said, now since many of you actually understand Sanskrit and is able to make sense of Sanskrit, then it is important to appreciate the many differing interpretations of the same term, the manner in which syllables are broken down to highlight another set of perspective on the same term. So as we already discussed, that pramana, the word pra, from a particular Buddhist school is understood as prime and so forth. And then as you pointed out, that pramana, when taken together, seems to refer towards proof or evidence. So now it is our task as someone who studies Buddhist philosophy to kind of accommodate all of these varying perspectives and try to make sense of what exactly do we mean by valid cognition intellectually and through our own experiences.
How did you break it? Pra is prime?
Yes, mana referring to cognition. Pramana le di pra le di zo le chi lo koya che.
조도 거야 조도 랍지바라 조도 동보 아니 만나서야데 자와 또바 하고와 드리를 대시 자고 이랬으니까 노준에서 자와이나
So from the Buddhist perspective, we kind of break down the word pramana into these syllables, pra and mana. So pra referring to prime, prime in the sense, sometimes in the sense of first or new, or prime, or sometimes in the sense of main or prime, as we primary. Object of primary object, and mana referring to knowing it, mana referring to cognizing it or cognition.
다 들으지 디교지로 대체 된주 수요디 집에 또 봤어요. 최종 대리스 단단 가르스나 또 봤어야데 열린 주비 니갑스 가르스나 단홍지기 단다 된지서 오는 단홍지기 열린 중중중중게 로데라 또 봤어 도시그레스
So now, if we understand these correctly, we can now approach the threefold division, and the first of which is conceptual consciousness, which takes a meaning generality as its apprehended object. Now, as we understand it, conceptual consciousness or thought can only begin to engage its object with the use of a mental image.
대체 단예버데 가르스나 롱치 중유디 집에 동미 맞춰 시바스 제조 원섬데라 가르자 어르스나 롱치 승도와 롱치 소원디 유디 노알라 장노노 투무구바 예진보 아니 가르스나 로유디 치팅기 로티라 중유디 치팅기 로텔라 가르스나 로 롱치 영업이 니스 파주고 여기 니스데 중유디 집에 아니 로치라 마트위 시바질라 아니 가래 가래서나 동미 마트위 시바스 롱치 중유디 진행기 파주 예제바 가래서나 된지기 장농 때먹어 봐 예제바 세번 차탱기 아니 마트위 시바질라 아니 동미 마트위 시바스 오토스지니 세게레스 아테레
So now moving on, the second non-conceptual consciousness, which takes a specifically characterized phenomena as its apprehended object. Now we have to add the qualifier. There is a qualifier missing in this particular text. We have to add non-conceptual, unmistaken consciousness, which takes a specifically characterized phenomena as its apprehended object. So herein, a specifically characterized phenomena refers to the actual object itself, not a mental object. So generality refers to a conceptual image. So specifically characterized phenomena refers to the actual object itself, not a generally characterized phenomena, not using a mental image. So a non-conceptual unmistaken consciousness is that which gets at its object directly, unmediated in the sense that it doesn't employ the use of a mental image which resembles the actual object. It gets at its object directly and perceives it directly.
Through its characteristics.
Through the object's characteristics, or?
Yeah, specifically characterized phenomena.
That refers to the object itself.
Yeah. So object's characteristics.
따뜻한데라 랑첸 like 첸 라지오라. 디 첸이 디스라 유코랑기 첸이 라샤게요.
It is 랑센사 유크론을 고고 그래서.
So the specifically characterized phenomena, the characterized herein refers to the object itself.
대지에 사서 다 somebody 가르쳐서는 매바 상문 주의의 집이 동미 지시해야 돼. 다 동미 로시스야. 다리 권이 되셔야 돼요. 배나 공론 공부 농이 미시. 아니 로 다와는 시기 다와지라 다와니 농이 미시를 있고 동미기 로시래지도 어때서라 가르쳐서라 매바 상문 주의의 집이 아니 가르래 동미 지시스
So moving on, the third one is non-conceptual mistaken consciousness, which takes a clearly appearing non-existent thing or non-existent as its apprehended object. Now this is exactly what we mean by wrong consciousness. Non-conceptual mistaken consciousness, which takes a clearly appearing non-existent as its apprehended object. So I sense consciousness apprehending a white mountain as blue. I sense consciousness which perceives two moons, wherein actually there is only one moon. So what do we call it? Double vision? So double vision is a wrong consciousness.
대지에 사서 제지 다 디노는 들송이다 동보도 똑바텐지 니바도 원섬 되지 송도 던지 송유디 집이 똑바대도 똑바니 된지리스 니바랑 제 송유디 집이 동미 맞춰 시바대도 가르서는 원섬시야 되지 차대 그래 somebody 가르서는 동미로시 로시들로 똑바 로시도 동미로시 니지노니 가르서는 somebody 가르서는 동미로시 두진의 차대기 그래서
So now if we are to kind of make sense of these threefold division in its relation to the sevenfold division, then it is said that if it is a conceptual consciousness which takes a meaning generality as its apprehended object, then it is a conceptual thought or it is a conceptual conscious. Then similarly, if it is a non-conceptual consciousness, if it is a non-conceptual unmistaken consciousness which takes a specifically characterized phenomena as its apprehended object, then it is a direct perception. And then if it is a non-conceptual mistaken consciousness which takes a clearly appearing non-existent as its apprehended object, then it is a non-conceptual wrong consciousness.
제도 다 던디데라 권ning 안주 로리기 둥기 예와디 디시냐 뭐 고야 보지 추타와라위나 단다 시만이디 로리 순데 예와도 로리 니시 예와데서 this 리라보 차도 그래서
So if we are able to make sense of the sevenfold division first, if we are able to have a clear understanding of the sevenfold division of consciousness, then the later modes of classification, the threefold classification and the twofold classifications becomes easier. So we stop here and break for lunch and gather again in the afternoon.
라서 야야